Hello. Okay, yeah, good. Hello everybody and welcome to this evening's panel discussion. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Sophie. I am a certified life and health coach and I'm also the founder of Happy Melon. Happy Melon is a self-development company where I absolutely love helping people to lead happier, healthier and more fulfilling lives. If not, I'm slightly obsessed with it. So I'm normally coaching people one-to-one or giving masterclasses. But here I am this evening giving a panel discussion. How exciting. I'd love to introduce this evening's panel. We are going to be talking about all things productivity and effectiveness. So on the far end, we have Connor O'Brien. Some of you may recognise Connor.
Sorry.
He is the founder of Absolute Body Solutions, which is an elite personal training gym, which is in 5 locations across the UK, including Leeds. He's also the founder of Chipper, which is a well-being platform, which allows corporate companies to access well-being resources for his teams. Connor's achievements speak for themselves. He's got 2 companies, he's a father, and he's also got to manage his own personal life. So I'm sure we're going to hear lots about discipline, perseverance, and tenacity today from Connor. Thank you very much for being here.
No problem, thank you.
Next, we've got Erica. Erica Marmay is a yoga instructor, a self-discovery expert, a relationship coach, and a very dear friend of mine. Erica lives and breathes and embodies all things holistic health, personal growth, and human connection, whether that's connection with yourself or with other people. Erica's also undergone her very own personal transformation, which is extremely inspiring. She has turned her life around and she also helps her clients to navigate their own personal journeys to lead more fulfilling lives. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you for having me.
Last but not least, we have Joshua McClaren. Welcome, Josh. Josh is the sports psychologist for Newcastle United women's team, where he helps the team and individuals to cultivate winning mindsets and a winning team culture. Josh is also the lead at McLaren Performance Golf Academy, thank you, and he's also a coach for other elite athletes, helping them fulfill their potential and perform at their best. Well, what a lineup we have for you this evening to talk about productivity and effectiveness. Before we dive into the discussion, I would love for you all to just take a little moment to think about why you've come to the discussion today. I ask you to do this because as a life coach, quite often I see people jump into things without really thinking about what it is that they're trying to achieve and what their goal is. We're taught from a young age that to be successful, we need to be more productive, and we can just blindly chase doing, and not really think about what the end game is. For this talk today, the panel is here to help you choose what it is that you're trying to achieve, how to identify what your goals are, but also equip you with the tools that you need to be more productive in this journey. We're going to be looking at productivity and effectiveness through the lens of habits, goals, and behavior change, because we can't begin to be more productive and effective without looking at what we do on a daily basis. So, without further ado, I'd love to jump into the discussion. I'd love to start with the science and psychology of behavior change, because, as I said, we need to understand why we do behaviors and we need to look at what we're doing every day. So, Josh, I'd love to start with you. As a behavioural psychologist, can you please tell us the basics of how we learn new behaviours and anything that might be beneficial to us to understand our sort of programming?
The way I kind of look at it with athletes who I work with, the thing I always describe with athletes anyway is system 1, system 2, and that's how the mind works for me at least anyway. So system 1 is the quick and the instinctive sort of thinking. So if you're thinking 2 + 2 and the answer 4 comes straight into your head, that's the real instinctive stuff. And then there's system 2, which is the slow and the logical, and that's the things we have to think over and really put a lot of cognitive load into that sort of thinking. And when you're learning to do something, with athletes learning to do something, at first it's something they have to really consciously think about quite a lot. And as they do that more and more, that becomes really more and more instinctive. And that becomes more of system 1. And how that works when I talk to athletes is it's often the case where pressure and any other factors really take away from that system 1 instinctive thinking, being instinctive in the flow, in the zone, whatever you want to call it, during competition. It takes them out of that and makes them overthink what they're doing. But in relation to habits, I think every day really we function and do a lot of things within System 1, quick instinctive things that we do all the time that we don't really think about but aren't necessarily healthy for us or are healthy for us. And it's really consciously identifying those things and then implementing intervention that is then consciously having to be thought about and doing that again and again and doing it again and again until it's something that becomes instinctive. And that's probably the challenge we all face if we think we want to do that thing in 2, 3, 5 years. But the effort to which to change a routine or a daily whatever you do to get to that point is probably the hardest part, and that's where people probably fall down at some point eventually when they're doing it, is that obstacle.
Right, so you're saying to make things easier for ourselves, we need to keep repeating and repeating something until it becomes second nature.
Yeah, that's the challenge, is to repeat and repeat over again, despite it being such a load on us mentally and physically and whatever it is. I think the interventions to do that, and I think one of the key ones is the environment that you surround yourself with. I think it's so much easier to do something if you're surrounding yourself with the people that also do the same thing. There's a stat I always use quite a lot when I'm talking to especially with football, when I'm talking to the team, is 70% of human behaviour is influenced by the people around us. So we're just massively social people. We're not really individuals. We're just so interconnected with everybody. So ultimately we call it standards in an environment in the team. The standards that are set are the actions that are done every day, but it's so easy to do those actions when everybody else is doing it. So to surround yourself with the right people or the people you want to repeat those actions that they're doing, then you've got to surround yourself with those people. I think another thing to it as well is, more probably scientific, is replacing that stimulus with something else. So if, the classic example is a smoker. So if you're a smoker, what you would replace that with is a stimulus that doesn't have a negative effect. You can't just stop doing it. What you'd replace it with is anything really, like a lollipop or whatever you do. Yes, they have to replace the stimulus to kind of have that trigger still for that instinctive part of your mind to be active still, but to not have the negative effects either. But ultimately, yeah, sorry.
So no, we've gone into a few parts here. I'd love to pick it apart a little more.
I told you I'd ramble. So
yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. I'm excited that you're excited about it. But when you were talking about who you surround yourself with and relationships and the influence that this has on your effectiveness, I saw Erica nodding away. And as a relationship expert and big lover of human connection, I'd love to hear what you have to say around who you surround yourself with and how that influences the choices you make.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I appreciate you mentioning that we are really not designed to be living a life that is an individual life. We are social mammals. We are designed for connection, and therefore we crave, to find our community in some way or another. And some of us are primed since an early age to feel naturally connected to people, and some of us aren't. And so we tend to learn from others, and some of us who haven't had perhaps much community around have to figure it out for ourselves. And so what I usually encourage people to do in the process of clarifying what they want, what's important to them, and therefore defining what kind of goals and visions they have for themselves, is to really go through a process of self-inquiry and to also share their vision and their goals with the people around them, because when we start to verbalize our thoughts, we give them energy and we ultimately begin the process of self-actualization. And we need each other to begin really that process, in my view.
So you're saying, are you saying it's going to be more difficult for us to make change if we try and do things by ourselves?
For some of us, perhaps, depending, I think, on how we've been wired, I think from an early age. Perhaps in my experience, I'm an only child, so I have been used to really being alone a lot. And so I'm quite comfortable with just being curious about things and not really needing people much. But then I do recognize the benefit of having a community around me where I get to, I guess, receive feedback and, ultimately be seen in my, in my journey, So I think it really varies. I would say it's best to have a community than not have a community, for sure.
And what about those people who don't have a community, or maybe that might be one of their goals, is to build a community and they don't have friends nearby, they really struggle with that part? what would you recommend? How important is it that they seek support or something along those lines? I mean, Connor as well, I'd love to come to you on this at some point.
Yeah, I think you can probably, if this is working, there we go. So I think even things like this, probably at that end, if you haven't got anyone naturally yourself, coming to an event like this, you can bump into people in certain fields, whatever it is you're looking to do, and then build on it from there in a way. Tying into what Josh was saying about sort of the people you surround yourself with help, and I have sort of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you can improve that in whatever avenue it is you're looking to do. For me now, it used to be how do we become the best personal trainer. Now the position I'm in the business, that's moved on to running the business. So it used to be, right, who are the top trainers in the world? How do I spend time with them to become the best trainer I can be? Now that's trainers within our business who are doing that. For me, it's, okay, who are the best business people you can then spend the time with and pull their knowledge and advice into it. So it's that who you surround yourself with can massively influence it. And then for me, I soundboard off people, and then, so I have my opinion, bounce it off different people, and then go ahead with what I was thinking in the first place sometimes. No, but you try and, you do try and bounce it off and then get those different opinions. So I was saying earlier about, like, because I think you mentioned about some people having, like, negative. So if you want to change or you're trying to achieve something, and sometimes people are like, oh, don't go for that, or, you know, are quite negative about it, you could have that. But sometimes having people who've been in different situations. So I have 2 key mentors. One of them's a business owner, one of them's a very high level employee. So when I was saying I'm going to do the London location, the business owner was like, do it, you've got to do it, you've got to risk it. The high level employee was like, whoa, have you got the money in the bank? Have you checked this? And was going through everything more thorough than what the sort of entrepreneur guy was doing. But taking both and then taking on board what the business owner said, because he understands it from a business point of view, and maybe made me do the finances in a little bit more detail, has ended up with a better result. But so yeah, I guess it ties into the people you surround yourself with can then massively influence the outcome on it, because we ended up doing the London location, but the location that we picked was the smaller size. So our London location is probably half our Leeds location, for example. So it's a much smaller facility, but then our overheads are £100,000 a year less, which then pleases the sort of the finance sort of mentor in a way, and then gives me the much less risk. So the balance of the two helps.
Right. So I heard a couple of things that you were saying. I'd love to come back to the point of how helpful support is. But one thing that really stood out from everything you were all saying is that you all seem quite clear on what your goals are, and that's really helpful in identifying who you want to spend your time with, because you know exactly what you're trying to achieve. But what about someone who's not clear exactly what kind of person they want to be or what their life goal is, and they just don't know where to start? So how would they know who to surround themselves with? And perhaps the question is, how important is it to have a clear goal? Anyone can pick.
Who's going first? I find that discussion really interesting, because the example I got, I was talking to one of that, so with the golf academy, I work with a lot of young golfers, and ultimately the aim with them is to develop them into professional golfers. And one of the girls I was working with, she was really frustrated at the time, probably still is to be fair, but she always comes second, always comes third, always works really hard, but never quite got that, what she wanted just at that time, ultimately with that aim of being a professional golfer. And talking to her, I felt like she put so much weight on herself for having that particular aim and putting so much into that. And what I kind of took from that conversation was, I don't think you should put so much weight on that goal, that specific thing that you want in so many years' time. I think it's a great aim to have, but I wouldn't put so much stress into that thing. We talk about what decisions to make, how to even pick that. I think in the things that I do, I don't necessarily have an overarching aim of this is the final point that I really want to get to. I think the biggest consideration is what is the sort of person you want to be right now. I think you become what you are in the present, really. And when we talk about habits and routines, that is ultimately what you become. You become your day-to-day of what you do. So I think the ultimate focus is, and for any advice I'd give, I think it's what are you interested in? What type of person do you want to be now? What are the things that are in your control now that you can start to implement to be that? And to not put too much weight on and negativity on maybe I won't reach that or maybe I will reach that point at the end of the day. I think it's more important. The present is probably more important than anything. And that's advice I always give to athletes, because they have so much pressures and so much everything, and sometimes they don't enjoy the present of what they're doing, because ultimately that also gets the best out of yourself as well. Some people put so much stress on the present and maybe eventually don't even reach the goals that they want to reach at the end of the day, and ultimately live a life that isn't that fulfilling. But it's ultimately the present that is the key thing to focus on all the time. Because I have that conflicting thing now of working with athletes and getting them to a point, making them win. But there's an interesting debate as to how much sacrifice it takes to get those goals sometimes, and how much happiness you're actually supposed to sacrifice to get them, when you could ultimately have that happiness in the present anyway. It's that trade-off and that in between. But I feel like I've rambled again, because that's quite a lot of different things.
Can I touch on that really quick? So I have got an interesting one on that. So I think we have with our clients where we try and set them realistic goals and try and get them as realistic as possible. But there's a balance of sometimes an over-ambitious goal helps in a weird way. So like, but the tie is then what do you want and what's the end goal and what are you tying it in for? Because is the unhappiness worth it in a way? Because 100% there's unhappiness that comes with it in certain aspects. So like, if you want to achieve the top level sport, which is what you're working with, it's so hard, and the dedication will have its bad points. For me to achieve what I know my goals are within the business, then has the sacrifice with it 100%. You speak to the people who've had similar goals or achieved the level of, essentially, like for the business person, wealth in a way. In sport, it would be achieving whatever the result would be. But the over-ambition, you maybe don't hit it, but you hit higher than you would have. But the flip side is then what is the unhappiness that then goes with that? So what is the goal? So I was talking to, we basically train the guy who runs Peel Group, so like the own Trafford Centre. I think they're the biggest landowner outside of the Crown, essentially, in the UK. He runs that business. He's got a great life. His owner, he was showing me a house that he owns, the owner. The hallway is the dining room is probably the size of this room.
Sorry, Connor, I'm confused as to what the link is. I've lost where we are.
It's that, like, what's the goal? And sort of, like, being clear with the goal of, if you really need to achieve something high, there's a potential downside to it. Are you willing to achieve that, essentially? And sort of giving yourself a bigger goal than you can achieve to then sort of come just under it. But then, do you want that, essentially? So like the guy who, like, what are you doing it for, in a way? Like the guy who's got the house, like the room the size of this as a dining room's never going to eat in that room. Do you really need that level, or can you be much happier with a smaller goal? So it's finding the balance of where does your goal want to be.
But it's the difference between, you point exactly, the difference between the external and the internal, and trying to find happiness really in something that's external, that's ultimately uncontrollable. We talk about with athletes, it's a focus on the controllables all the time, because the way I always describe it is it's mind, action, result, and the result is really the ultimate uncontrollable. That's the most controllable, and the actions as well also. And that's where the focus should be, and that's really where the happiness comes from, and that's where I think you almost make aims for that also. And I think you're right, you have aims, but you don't. It's great to have aims and to fall short of them, because you find yourself in a better place than where you were before. I think that's the best thing you can do, really, to have those aims, but to not attach the world to every uncontrollable external thing. You have to have some acceptance of that at the same time, to really make those things effective. I think you burden yourself, you hold yourself back when you focus too much on those uncontrollable things.
It's interesting because we've had different angles from how important goals are. To you, it's the present moment, and making sure that you're enjoying the process as much as you can, and then aiming for the moon and you'll land among the stars. And then I'd love to hear from you, Erica, a bit about, because I know you've got lots to say on the why part. I'd love to hear you
so
talk
for me,
about
this is when I work with people, and in my experience as well, before setting any goal, before even thinking about a habit or trying to change the behavior, for me, it's about doing the groundwork. And the groundwork is different for everyone, but to me is rooted in really understanding your true self versus your strategic self. And this can go really, really deep, we know this, but I'll be happy to answer any more questions about that. But values are something that we all live by, but we are not very conscious of them. We are born in families and in communities where there are sets of values that we naturally somewhat absorb without being fully conscious of it. So when we grow, we ultimately have to hit a point where we start to question and be curious about what our individual values are. Because ultimately they are the ones that drive our actions and our behaviors. And when we think of, in my view, when we set a habit, by setting a habit, ultimately we are trying to fulfill a need. And needs and core values are linked, and to know what we truly want as individuals and to be curious and inquisitive about that is ultimately going to give us our why, and it's going to make us show up in the world in a more authentic way that is based on who we are versus who we think we should be because so and so said so. And so that to me is the groundwork of every kind of connection I make, whether that's personal, whether that's professional, and really inviting people to slow down, think about where they come from in terms of values, if they're okay with the values they've been absorbing through life, because some of them can be really, really useful, some of them don't really serve us, they don't really speak of who we are and our character. And so I think that's necessary work, in my view, when we look at creating a vision for ourselves. Does that make sense?
It does. I hope it makes sense to everyone else. But as a self-discovery expert, you're talking about values, which for you and I is a fairly familiar concept, but for other people, maybe they're not sure what their values are or how to even identify them. Do you have any advice, or what's the process that you use with your clients to help people figure out what it is that they want and why?
Yeah, so I don't know, some of you might have come across the typical values exercise, which is pick 10 values out of a list of hundreds. And suddenly, when we do that kind of exercise, I don't know if any of you, I'd be really curious to know if somebody's done that exercise before. We want to be all of those. We want to be, somebody, who values honesty, who values integrity, and, all of the good stuff. But what out of all those values makes us who we are? And the exercise I do instead, it's a little bit deeper than that. It ultimately asks us to be very honest with ourselves, to take radical responsibility for where we're at in the moment, and ultimately look at where we put our time, where we put our money, and where we put our energy. Because that is what we value most. And, I think there's a lot of incongruence usually when we do that exercise that people don't realize, they carry with them. And so it's a process of assessing where we are in the moment, again, where we put our time, money, and energy into, and then defining whether we're happy with it or not. And my work is really to guide people to reframe what their priorities are, and therefore they're making authentic choices.
I'd love to stay with you just a little longer before I move on to the other two. Just about the matter of alignment. You say that where we put our money and spend our time and resources is what matters the most to us, but what if we're spending it on things that actually we think, I don't actually want to be spending all my money on alcohol, I don't really want to be sat thinking about going to the gym, but it's important to me. People can maybe have an idea of what they want, but they're not aligned. Why maybe are they not aligned, and maybe what's getting in the way?
That's a good question. Well, why they're not aligned is because they don't understand, again, perhaps, maybe they have not been used to, not being invited or encouraged to go through that process of self-inquiry. So for instance, something that comes to mind now is, I always think of this, as young children we are primed to answer questions, to give the right answer, right, at school. That's usually the setup. And when we tend to be curious and ask questions, often that's not welcome, right? So that kind of squashes our curiosity, squashes our authenticity, our desire to know more and to understand ourselves better. And because that gets lost along the way very early in life, we then ultimately show up in the world today doing things, making choices based on what we see other people do and model to us. And that's really speaking of the true self versus strategic self, which I can go in depth at some point.
And perhaps also who you hang around with as well might also be influencing it, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. Choosing your people, choosing who you want to be inspired by. Going back to your previous question is, how does somebody get unstuck? How does somebody get out there and find their communities? Like, well, think of how are you feeling right now? Are you happy with how you're feeling? If you're feeling stuck, what is the opposite, right? And then seek people who seem to offer the opposite, embody the opposite, and ultimately take the first step, get yourself a little bit out of comfort zone, and to reach out to those people and be curious about them.
Okay, thank you very much. Connor, you strike me as someone who knows what they want. You have two companies in the same industry and you've been doing it for a long time. I know because I've spoken to you about this before. How did you know that was the thing that you wanted to do and that you wanted to give your all to it?
It just come naturally, really. So unfortunately, I was a failed sports person. So I was sort of a boxer, and then it got to a point where from boxing, that led me into personal training, essentially. And then whatever it is, I wanted to be the best. So it was for boxing, I wanted to be a world champion fundamentally. And then it got to a point where you can either do that or work. Thankfully chose work. And then it was just constantly striving to be the best. And that moved on sort of as it grows. So first of all, it was to be the best personal trainer, get the best results, which is what our business was then based off. Then it was, right, I want a gym of my own. Then it was, I want a gym that looks a certain way. Then we done that. Then it was, I want 10 gyms. So it was sort of halfway there at the moment. So it just was half natural, I think, and it is a little bit natural. But then, like, who you surround yourself with, you see, like, the successes, and that pushes you on. And then I think, that, and then it just becomes, I think, the habit as well, as we touch on. So you have the motivation, which, okay, you see, like, the person who lives on my road who's, got X business, that gives you the motivation. We know from our business, motivation lasts 30 seconds. Someone, I was saying earlier, we get a lot of inquiries on a Saturday night, partly because I think we're just off Greek Street where people are on a Saturday night, and in Manchester we're right above Rudy's and Albert Slosh where a lot of people are on a Friday night. So people see it, they go, basically, I'm drunk, I've just had pizza, I need to get fit. They're motivated in the instant, but then the dedication then comes into it to then actually sustain it. So the dedication's what gets them there. The dedication then creates the habit and the routine. The routine then creates the habit. So it's that sort of pathway of being motivated, then the dedication to stick to it. So, like, I guess for me, it's, right, the motivation of, right, I want to have a business of exercise, or I want 10 locations, is the motivation from seeing it. The dedication is then the amount of hours it takes. But then, so you create the routine around that. Okay, what's the routine? Well, I need to wake up at a certain time. I need to do meetings I need a one-to-one with this member of staff. I need team meetings at this time. So that then becomes, like, for us this year, mine's changed quite a bit. I've had a baby. I haven't had a baby. But, my ex-wife has had a baby. So we've got that in the mix, which you then have to create the routine around it. So you're ruthless with time in a way. But then, so when I planned it out for this year, it was like, okay, it's Monday morning is 9 to this meeting, 10 to this meeting, which become sort of the routine. Now I don't even need my diary to know what the week looks like, because that's then the habit. So it's that transition period, really, from being motivated, the dedication it takes to get there, because to be successful in anything will take that. Then sort of the routine, what it takes for it, and then that routine becomes the habit to sustain it.
Right, so the cycle that I've spotted is, first it starts off as something that you have to, oh gosh, I've lost my train of thought, where did it come from? What was the first point you said? It starts its journey as something that you have to start integrating into your routine. And then motivation, that's it. So first you get your hit of motivation, and then you're going to need to hack into your discipline. That's where discipline needs to be high, because motivation has gone down. You need your discipline, and then it becomes routine. So you don't really necessarily need your discipline to be quite so strong, because it's become second nature. With the discipline part, how I think of discipline is your ability to self-parent. Because as a kid, you're told when to go to bed, you're sort of told what to eat. You don't really have to think about it, and the responsibility isn't on you. When you become an adult and you leave home, you have to parent yourself. You become the dictator of your choices, and you are therefore in control of your life. And you have to learn to parent yourselves again, which is how I consider discipline. You strike me as someone very disciplined. Have you always had that? Or is that something that you've had to cultivate? And have you had any challenges there?
I think in a way, yes. So there's so there's a balance of two things with it. Is one, probably yes. I think sport helps that. In reality, I think anyone who's been at a decent level in sport, it's just, again, it's the environment you're in. Grew up in a boxing gym, and swimming was the other sport that I was relatively good at as well. So you're in competitive environments. That I've also got a parent that also drills the discipline in that way. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to have to say it. I do have ADHD, but I'm not one of these where I've made it up. So I am. So training all the time as a kid helped with that. So now it sort of transitions into being able to work long hours. Well,
that's amazing that you've managed it. You're a good example for someone who has it, and you've managed it. Look at you with two companies. Yeah. That's a great advocate.
So there's that element, but then there is the flip side of there's elements where you go, right, so I guess yes, discipline, but there is the moment of why am I doing this sometimes. I think everyone has it with whatever they do. I think anyone really achieves, and I think I was speaking to my friend the other day who's a top level lawyer and is working till 1:30 a.m. every day at the moment, and then mum said to her, do you really want to do this? But it's like, unfortunately, the way you will do that in any company that you go to, because that's a little bit naturally how you are with it. You are that type of person to work that way, and that's what essentially it's what makes them happy though as well. So if someone put me in a 9-to-5 job and I couldn't work crazy hours, I'd be very unhappy. So it's fine, yeah. What suits you? Yeah.
I have a question for you, Josh, actually, on the motivation topic. Working with teams like Newcastle United, there are going to be moments where motivation is going to run really high. Things are going well, motivation is high, and imagine there's going to be moments where it just plummets. What do you pull out of your motivational toolkit, so to speak? How do you help get people back on the bandwagon?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We've had it in football. Seasons are so long, so it doesn't feel long, but then it gets long and it keeps getting harder. And every day we do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then we play a game on Sunday, and that's over and over and over again. And it's for the players, it's keeping that motivation the entire time. It's a long slog of games, and for us, we're really dominant in our league at the moment. And what we're doing is we're going up and up the leagues as we're luckily getting funding from the club. But to get through each game, to get through every day, there's a certain day we have, which is on Tuesdays is our technical day. It's where sessions are quite light, and it's mainly just passing and moving and not really very competitive. And we found that it's very difficult to get the motivation for the players in that. But I think motivation comes from a clear idea, it maybe contradicts from what I was saying before, but a clear idea of what you want and understanding how the steps that you're doing and what you're doing now really connects to that. So every time you have that sort of doubt, you know the purpose of what you're doing. We were working, another golfer I was working with as well, a young lad he's top. He's going to be top at what he does. He's really top talent at golf. He wakes up 5:30 every morning, runs every morning. This is about a 14-year-old lad, and he's talking about discipline. He's got the discipline. He's going to make it because he's got the discipline. But we had a session with him, and we were saying, I think one of the things, he goes to bed a bit late, so he didn't necessarily get all that sleep. He wasn't necessarily doing all the gym sessions he was supposed to be doing. We had a bit of a word with him because it's these things, and it's exactly what we're talking about today. It's these things that really build into what you want to do. He wants to get to the very top of what he does, and sadly you have to sacrifice a lot to do that. He has to spend a lot of time gym, go to school, on the golf course, going to bed 7 a.m. or 7 p.m, whatever that is, to get up at 5:30 a.m. again and to do that. And he has the motivation because he has an absolute strong desire to do it.
It's his why.
Yeah, when you talk about what you're talking about there, it's so much ingrained in us, in how we're raised. And at that point, when we're children, our minds are so malleable. We're so dependent, even more so on other people. But yeah, we're so malleable when we're younger, and everything around us shapes us how we want to be. I think about myself, and I know the parents I have, they were always so hard working and everything they did, and I find myself now being someone that does that also, because you also, I don't know how it works for everyone else, but I feel like you do stuff and you think, flipping it, my dad would kill me if I was going to do this, so I'm not going to do that. Right. And that's what you would get ingrained in you from such an early age, and then you keep doing that. I think it is very difficult to change those intuitions. Yeah, and everything you learn at that age, and it's if you need to, then you have to. When you're older, it's very difficult to change those instincts that you already have from how you were raised before. But if you have that desire to really want to do it, I think you will. When you talk about yourself and how you've got into you can almost see like that stirring pot of a childhood that kind of built exactly what you've got. You could predict it if you look back. And I think life is, we always have a discussion about free will versus determinism. And to be fair, in terms of, do we have free will, or is everything determined for us, really? And to be fair, I sometimes fall on the determinism side of things. I think everything just happens, and there's not much choice we have. Everything impacts us around us and forms us into what we are. And it's in many ways, kind of illusion of choice. We're just formed by these things that happen, that give us these drives and wants and needs, and then they fuel us every day, and then they go into what we want to do. You have to make a real conscious effort to change that path that you end up going on.
We have to decide to do the things. Like, we can have the drive, but it's whether we act on those impulses or whether we let them slide, like the walking past Greek Street, and they did the first part, but they didn't do the follow through when they were sober the next morning. Yeah,
so the 30 inquiries per location all of a sudden turns into 10 people that actually pick up the phone on Monday when they the motivation has lapsed pretty quick, essentially.
Yeah, so I think it is having that why, isn't it? Knowing that you want it and being as committed as you possibly can to being the person that you said earlier in the conversation, who you want to be right now. You have to decide to make that choice, and then you start to be more productive, be more effective, working towards those goals. But it's in that decision, it's in that moment where you say, this is what I want to do, and that is that. And maybe not getting attached to the specifics of it, but just knowing the direction that you're going is extremely helpful in helping you get there. Right, we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to just touch on one topic, which is a bit of sort of self-reflection and how we can effectively, how we review progress and things like that. But before I do, we are going to come to a Q&A, so please think of some questions if you have any that you want to ask the panel. Right, so with modifying, it's my personal belief that I don't think we should really tweak a habit that we're trialing out until we've done it for a set amount of time, because if we start tweaking it and maybe making it too hard, we then jump off the bandwagon. In your experience, when is a good time, I think maybe for Connor for this one, because you do this with lifestyle with your clients, when is a good time to review progress, and how do you effectively review your progress?
Yeah, so we try and do it, I guess, as similar to people's lifestyle as possible now. So if we're doing like nutrition, for example, if someone doesn't eat breakfast, the likelihood of us getting someone to eat breakfast straight away is going to be quite difficult. So we generally go, right, what's the lowest hanging fruit that's the biggest issue that they've got, that's the easiest one to swap out? I think you touched on something very similar in like the first answer that you give. So it's find the lowest hanging fruit and change that. Essentially make the easiest changes first, and as you create them changes, it then becomes easier for it to sort of change. And then, say for example, when we do have breakfast in, it'll be a shake first, because then it's quick, it's easy, you don't have the excuse. That then transitions into food. So it's, I guess, yeah, make the smallest and easiest changes, build them into the routine, and then that allows you to then add the sort of what would then become a little change. If you give that straight away, is a huge change.
Right, so that's kind of with the planning, isn't it? So when you're planning, it's like, what are my challenges going to be? What can I anticipate? What do I struggle with? And then, as you say, go for the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah, we try and go like, what's the current lifestyle, and how do you tweak your lifestyle now to make it suit what your goal is to achieve? It work with anything really, wouldn't it? Whether it's work, whether it's training, nutrition, what's your current patterns? So we have someone training with us, and they train Not at all. We know we're going to have to take it a little bit easier in them first few weeks. If someone trains 4 days a week and they've done CrossFit, we know they're going to be fit and have a sort of decent system, so you know what training routines you can do with them. So you can apply it to anything really. So what's your current lifestyle and situation? What's the goal you're looking to achieve, whether that's personal, work, fitness, health, and then what are the changes you can tweak from your current lifestyle that make it better suited to the goal in a way?
Yeah, something scalable I've heard is also helpful. Before we finish, I just want to go quickly to you, Erica. In terms of the self-reflection part, the founder of Visa said that we should spend 50% of our time doing self-reflection and self-discovery. Do you have any advice for people when they're sort of reviewing how things are going to see whether it's aligned? Like, how can they be like, oh, now it's time to shift, or maybe if I keep going, is there anything that, like a tool or anything that they could use?
I mean, there's many things really. What I encourage people to do is to actually just meet themselves and set time, just as if they were setting time for any other meeting or appointment or anything else for reflection, so that it's intentional. And yeah, just really focusing on that point of asking yourself questions and being curious about how you're doing, and being honest and radically, honest with yourself about the progress you're making and how you're feeling. And just really knowing your non-negotiables as well, and making that itself a non-negotiable, making sure that you set yourself a realistic time and a frequency as to how much you want to check in with yourself, knowing yourself.
Right, what's realistic, and then being accountable to yourself because of your why, because it's what you want, because that's who you want to be and what you want your life to be about. I could talk to you all for another hour, but unfortunately the timer is up for today's discussion. I would love to hand this over to the floor. There is no pressure for you to ask any questions, but I want to give you the space to do so because it is such an interesting topic and you've got such a range of experts here. So if anyone has a question, please state your question and ideally who the question is for. If not, people are going to be hanging around and you can pinch them afterwards. But does anyone have a question that they are burning to? Yes, go on, Jack. Who's it for?
I would say my question is for all four of you, really, whoever wants to pick it up. So what sort of tips would you have for like growing willpower and that determination that you've spoken about? Like, how do you go from having very little willpower like I do to getting a bit more in terms of all of your sort of expertise? Like, how would you go about doing that as a starting point?
I think I'd pass that to Erica. I think if you're ready for it, but.
Well, I would say learning to trust yourself and making tiny decisions day by day, because just by doing something different every day, by even just having the macro goal of wanting to grow and learn something new every day, it's plenty for you to leap forward. And ultimately, if you can just stick to that tiny goal, tiny habit, however you want to call it, each and every day, then you can cultivate confidence because you're showing up for you every day. And again, making it realistic and small. If that's where you're at, it's definitely better than not starting whatsoever. And then definitely speak to somebody trusted that has your back, that has your best interest, just like you want to have it for yourself. It can help you really, like I said, vocalize what your intention is and therefore giving it energy.
I could also speak to tracking your progress as very, very helpful. If you're just doing something and you're not seeing how much progress you're making, it's easy to lose willpower. If you kind of know what it is that you're working on, whether that's to get fit, which is very vague, but if it was, for me, I'm currently working on handstand workouts 3 times a week. And I know very clearly when I've done it, and within 2 weeks I saw such a significant improvement, and also filming, taking pictures if it's anything like a fitness goal, but tracking progress for me is something that's absolutely integral to willpower, because when you can see you're making progress, you think, I'm going to keep going. So maybe have a diary, something where you can keep track of what you're doing, or something visual for you, because it's easy to forget. So that would be my personal advice. Any other questions We've got time for one more. I'm going to go for the lady. I'm going for the lady on the right.
This is for anyone who wants to answer this one. How do you, if you're doing multi-event, like multi-sport event, and you get to start day 2, and basically, no matter what anyone says or does in terms of motivation, you can't get to like the start line. Is there any tips on how you can push through that barrier?
Yeah. Is that for anyone or general?
Normally myself, but anyone. Really.
Okay, so how do you get yourself to do things that maybe are really challenging or are scary or you're feeling fear? Okay, does anyone feel confident answering that?
It's knowing what's holding you back, really. If a client said that to me, that's my first question. I'm like, what are the factors that are contributing towards that fear? Because there's clearly something maybe unidentified there that you kind of have to take head on first. Obviously, you probably don't want to speak about that publicly, so I'm not going to go into that sort of detail. But that's the kind of question I'd have. It probably answers your question, but it's knowing yourself, really. And something you said as well about value setting is something we talk about in sports psychology, is acceptance and commitment therapy, and something they do with that is value setting. And actually, I went to an academy once for football, and they did a very similar thing in terms of for the kids having a long-term aim, but having short-term aims with that, short-term goals, but with that also having the values underneath. If it comes to get motivation, it's understanding who you are and what you stand for, what do you want, what's that image you've got, you go flipping out, I'm going to die for that, and then that's what you end up doing. But that comes from knowing yourself as well, and self-awareness, and when it comes to an obstacle in terms of anything you're doing, it comes from self-awareness also. Most likely that fear you have is irrational, so it's kind of talking through that and finding that, and then going, there's nothing really to fear, and it's only a positive of going for it, really. I hope that solves your question, really.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I think it's taking small steps. Maybe don't launch into something that completely terrifies you straight away. Maybe start with small things. If it's, for example, social anxiety, start with striking up a conversation with a barista. Start there rather than maybe joining. An event like this can feel quite daunting because there's a lot of pressure to have sustained conversation, for example. So maybe if it's that, talk to a barista. Start really small, be clear what it is, what your ideal would look for, what are you striving for, best case scenario, future me. And then what is the next best thing I can do right now? Because it's just getting your foot on the ladder. If you start thinking about the thing up here, you're never going to get on the ladder because it's terrifying. So just start down here where you're sort of slightly uncomfortable. We're just trying to push our comfort zone out a little bit. If you imagine it being like a hoop, you're stuck in this hoop of comfort zone. It's nice and comfy and cozy in here, but you need to start pushing that little hoop a little wider, otherwise it's only ever going to stay as small as it is, and you will miss out on experiences. And then you have to weigh up the risk. Would you rather miss out on those experiences, or would you rather just dip your toe in something you could just about manage? So that's kind of how I would look at it as well. Right, I'm going to have to wrap up because, again, I could just keep waffling. But I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to our panel for being here this evening and giving your time to be here. It's been an absolute honour and truly fascinating. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Clockwise, and thank you, the After Work Club, for having me. And a big thank you to my partner as well, and my business partner and my fiancé for being my rock and helping me get through this. Right, everyone have a lovely evening. The bar is open. We'll be hanging around for a little bit. Have a nice night.